It is a wonderful day, wonderful day. There was a little boy who was struggling with history class. How many of you have been history buffs, or history was not very easy for you? A lot of memory work, a lot of dates, a lot of years, people you didn't know, people who've been gone for centuries, but you had to know it all, right? So he's struggling in history class. The teacher knew it. So the teacher said, Duke, his name was Dookie, just happened to have the same name as you, said, Dookie, come and see me. I want to talk to you about your test. He says, I think you've been cheating. He says, no, I haven't been cheating. He said, prove it. I haven't been cheating. He said, okay, let me ask you a question. The first question on the test was, who was the first president of the United States? Now, you sit right next to Sandra. And Sandra wrote down George Washington. And you wrote down George Washington. He said, I knew that. Who doesn't know that the first president was George Washington? So he says, okay, so the next question on the test was who freed the slaves? Sandra wrote down Abraham Lincoln. And you wrote down Abraham Lincoln. He said, I read it last night in the history book. I know Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. Okay. Well, the next question on the test was really confusing for me, how you answered it. Because the question was, who was the president of the United States at the time of the Louisiana Purchase? You wrote down, Sandra wrote down, I don't know. You wrote down, me neither. So I'm going to get into a little bit of history, some history you know and some history you may not know. This is the last Sunday of Black History Month. And the choir concert is dedicated to the music that Africans and those who followed after them brought and continue to bring to our great nation. The history of our music. And it's tied into, when we think about gospel music, you have the origin, which is said in history to be the African music that the slaves brought with them from their culture, from their heritage. Amazing Grace being one of those early songs. And then there was an addition with hymns that were written by people like the Gaithers. And so they added those songs and added an African flavor to it. Then there's the gospel, and those are spirituals, and there's the gospel, and then there's the gospel that includes country western and rock and other kinds. So when we talk about music, music is universal. It covers everyone. It is unity. So I hope you are planning to attend the concert and tell all your friends who are not here, they don't want to miss this. Every year somebody says, I missed it, because they hear so much about it. It is really powerful. And if you didn't see the play Woke, the amazing music that came from that play that just stirs your soul, just like gospel does. How many of you have not stood to your feet when this choir is singing a rousing gospel song? Like, I got a home up in the kingdom, ain't it that good news? I got a home up in the kingdom, ain't it that good news? I'm gonna lay down this world, gonna shoulder up my cross, gonna take it home to my Jesus, ain't it that good news? Gospel, the word, comes from the Greek word, euangelism, which is evangelism, which means good news. Good news. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about good news. Now, where does good news come from? Sometimes good news comes from bad news, right? We get the bad news, and then we can't wait for something good. Can somebody give me some good news? How many times have you heard that? When things seem to be going south, you just want to hear some good news from somewhere, right? Good news. Well, there was a preacher who told his congregation that he had some bad news and some good news. He said, what do you want to hear first? They said, we want some good news. They said, the good news is we're just about to pay off our building fund, our mortgage. We have just enough money. We have just about enough money to pay off our mortgage. The bad news is the rest of the money is in your pockets. So remember that when we get ready to take the offering, that you have the power in your purse and in your pockets to make a huge difference in this church. That's what that preacher was talking about. When you think about good news, today's daily word is perfect. It's forgive. Forgive, because sometimes that bad news is so bad that you can't let it go. When we think about the history of African Americans in this country, and we think about slavery and the atrocities that have occurred and continue to occur, not just in African American cultures, but all of our cultures, it's hard to forgive some things, right? It's hard to forgive. And a few weeks ago, I talked to you about this ancient Hawaiian practice called ho'oponopono, where you look within yourself. You forgive your thoughts, your behavior, your attitude, in order to effect change outside of you. So today's daily word is, as I forgive, I know the fullness of divine love. And this Black History Month celebration is all about love. There are people who say, why do we have Black History Month? Why do we celebrate Black History Month? In our Christian faith, it's important for us to remember that this is a way for us to express the divinity of all of humanity, our likeness, our sameness, our oneness. That learning about others' history and culture helps us to stand stronger, to be taller, to stand up for those who may be less fortunate, to love our neighbors as ourselves, as Jesus taught. So I chose today's daily word, forgiveness, because there has to be a lot of forgiveness in order to move forward. We can't live in the past, but we can not forget about the past. Not forget what happened before so that we don't repeat it. Someone has said, if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. And some things in our history we don't want to go back to, we don't want to repeat. So that's why it's important to learn about history. It's important that we understand what happened in the past so that we can continue to move forward into the future and not go down that same road again. As I forgive, I know the fullness of divine love. And it's that consciousness of divine love that several people came into the unity movement that I want to talk to you about today. If you haven't seen this booklet, it's available in the bookstore. It's called Gems of Wisdom. It's from Black Leaders of New Thought. Now, the book includes some of the first African-American pioneers who became ministers in unity, but it also includes other spiritual groups, other New Thought organizations, and some of their first. Well, I want to start with Reverend Dr. Johnny Colemon. How many of you have ever heard of Dr. Johnny Colemon? I don't see many hands. This is a good opportunity. You know that Charles Fillmore said unity is a classroom. Unity is a classroom, and that's sort of what separates us from a lot of other Sunday services that might be going on today. I'm not going to preach to you today. We don't do that. It's a lesson. It's a lesson, and hopefully there will be something in that lesson that you will take home with you, that you will share. So that today's lesson on Black History Month, the Gems of Wisdom, Black Leaders in New Thought, I want to share with you some things you may not know. Unity was not always integrated. I don't know if you know that, but it wasn't. There was a time after Charles and Myrtle, after their time, because you may have heard a few months ago, when we sat on this stage and talked about Bet You Didn't Know. And I bet you didn't know that in 1915, Unity was one of the first congregations in the greater Kansas City area to be integrated. I bet you didn't know that when a group of Black congregants came to the church down on 9th and Tracy and said, where should we sit? Because they were accustomed to sitting in the balcony or on the back rows. He said, sit anywhere you want. You can have all the front if you want it. So Unity didn't have this consciousness of racism, but Unity was still a product of our society, as we all are. So Reverend Dr. Johnny Colemon, in 1951, got a call from her doctor after a series of tests telling her that she had a terminal illness and she was not going to live very long. Johnny was a school teacher. She was a native of Mississippi. She lived in Chicago, and she was distraught. Imagine getting that news. Some of us have gotten that news before. As she was walking past her living room, her knee bumped a table and off fell a booklet. She picked up the booklet, and the title of the article was, "You are a child of God, therefore you do not inherit sickness." From the words that Myrtle Fillmore, Unity co-founder, heard from the speaker, Dr. E.B. Weeks, years before in the late 1800s, when she was diagnosed with a terminal illness. And she heard the speaker say, "I am a child of God, therefore I do not inherit sickness." Johnny had never heard of Unity, Myrtle Fillmore, or any of this. But she quickly gravitated to that article, and she argued with the booklet. How are you going to tell me that I'm a child of God and I do not inherit sickness when I was just told by my doctor that I have a terminal disease and I'm not going to live very long. Her mother had been stacking these booklets up on the table for Johnny to read, and she had been ignoring them. So she asked her mother, what is this? I just got this diagnosis. What is this about? She says, I've been trying to get you to read these booklets forever. Why don't you go to Unity Village and find out for yourself? Johnny comes to Unity Village from Chicago. And the woman who met her at the door welcomed her with open arms. And after she talked for a while and found out what Johnny wanted to do to be healed, she introduced her to several people, and Johnny fell in love with Unity Village. Unity had a program then that was a training program, and it was mostly a correspondence course. And Johnny enrolled in the program. When Johnny came to live on the campus, she was not allowed to live there. This is the early 1950s. She had to live in Kansas City, somewhere near in a black community, probably with people she may not have known, and drive out to Unity Village every day for class. And one day, her car flooded. There was a really bad storm. She couldn't get her car started. She's on the side of the road, halfway there, and she's just fit to be tied. When she finally makes it to Unity Village, did you see the movie about the 4 women who worked, the Hidden Figures, 4 women who worked for NASA, 4 black women? That was sort of like Johnny. So when she walked in the door, it's obvious, when I walk in the door and there's a sea of people who don't look like me, I become the object. So if I'm late, all attention is on me. It doesn't matter who else is late. But all attention, at least that's how it feels, is on me. So imagine how Johnny felt when she walked into that classroom, fashionably late. And Johnny said, I've had it. I'm not doing this anymore. I can't swim in the swimming pool. I can't eat in the cafeteria. And I cannot live on this campus. And I'm done with Unity. And threatened to walk out. Her classmates, one of them, Dr. Catherine Ponder, stood up and said, we go too. She goes, we go. All of her white classmates threatened to walk out. They provided Johnny with a cabin, away from everybody else, but it was a cabin. We call it Cottage J. If you ever go out to Unity Village, it's still there. And that's where Johnny lived most of the time. But it was damp and it was cold. And the first night when her mother came to stay with her, which her mother often did, she had to get another classmate to bring them some blankets. She didn't have the best of circumstances like everybody else. But Johnny went on to found Christ Universal Temple in Chicago, and at one time she had 20,000 congregants. She went on to found the Universal Foundation for Better Living. She graduated such ministers as Della Reese, the late Della Reese, Les Brown, the great speaker, Les Brown, and many others. Her organization still goes on today, and she also has the Johnny Coleman Theological Seminary in Florida, where she trains ministers. A few years ago, Unity as a whole recognized the mistake, the error, and invited Johnny back to the temple. Duke tells a story of how Johnny pulled up in front of this church in a limousine. She was about 6 feet tall, maybe 6'1", very statuesque. I mean, when she walked in the door, you knew who she was. And she taught the principles of unity, even though she changed her program to the Universal Foundation of Better Living. She knew the source of it. She never forgot that. She became an ordained unity minister and became the president of the Association of Unity Churches at one time. But there was this sense of not forgiving from the past. It was hard to let go of what had happened to her when she was here at Unity. But eventually, it was all reconciled. And now hundreds of Johnny's congregants come to Unity Village once a year. And there's a Johnny Coleman Day in August. There's archives that are being developed into the archive room honoring Johnny. And she wasn't the only one. Johnny's favorite phrase was, keep coming back, it works if you work it. And she would tell her congregants, this isn't an overnight success story. To change your life requires consistency, it requires persistence, it requires determination, it requires dedication. Now, this book is full of gems of wisdom from New Thought leaders like Johnny Coleman, Della Reese. I want to talk to you about Reverend Dr. Ruth Mosley, because it's on these people whose shoulders I stand. Reverend Ruth Mosley grew up in Mississippi like Johnny. She was 10 years younger than Johnny. In fact, we'll be celebrating her 90th birthday on March the 10th this year. Reverend Ruth, Johnny passed away December 23rd, 2014 at the age of 94. And Reverend Ruth is in a care facility in Tennessee, still going strong. In fact, she's teaching truth principles and unity teachings to the other residents in the care facility. Reverend Ruth came to Unity seeking, just like Johnny, how to heal myself, mentally and physically. And she got the same treatment. Johnny came in 1951, Reverend Ruth around 1956, the same kind of treatment. And Reverend Ruth was asked, when Johnny published an article, Johnny wrote an article that was published in Ebony magazine in 1978 that disparaged Unity, that said, we are a hypocrisy, we don't practice what we preach. And she talked about how she was treated. That is so against the teachings. Jesus said, what you do for the least of them, you do for me. You do for me. And we preach that, but do we really practice it? Because the scripture tells us in John, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. We need to go deeper than that. To know in Aramaic doesn't mean that you read it and you memorize it and you know the word and what the word means. It means to practice, to experience the truth in order for that truth to set you free. So Reverend Ruth, after Johnny's article, was asked, what can we do for your people? Reverend Ruth said, educate them. We need our own school. And in 1979, with very little education and know-how, this little woman started Unity Urban Ministerial School. In June of this year, Reverend David Adams will be ordained. He graduated from Unity Urban Ministerial School last year. David? Warren Teachout graduated from Unity Urban School 2 years ago. I graduated from Unity Urban Ministerial School in 2012 and was ordained in 2013. Because of these people, these Black New Thought leaders who had the courage to step outside of their comfort zones. Do you know how hard it is to step outside of your comfort zone when you're different than everybody else? When I walked into this church 40 years ago, this Easter, I stuck out like a sore thumb. Me, my husband, and our 2 little children. But there was something about this place that let me know that I was at home. That I can be at home with anyone because we are all brothers and sisters. We don't have to look alike. I don't look that much like my biological brother and sister. At least I don't think so. But we know we're brothers and sisters. We don't have to come from the same place. We don't have to have the same experiences. We have to have one thing, a heart of love. A heart of love. That's the unity message. That's what brings us diversity in thought, diversity in experience, diversity in ideas. It is wonderful to come to a service on a Sunday morning and see the diversity of God's handiwork. We ought to all be grateful for that because this doesn't look like all churches do. We ought to be grateful. Dr. King said the most segregated day of the week is Sunday. But we don't want to just stop after the service and the concert's over. We want to carry that integrated thought with us everywhere we go, with everybody we meet. Because there are no strangers. We're all brothers and sisters. So I have a few quotes from some of these Black New Thought leaders that I put on the bulletin, and I want you to make sure you go to the bookstore and pick up one of these booklets. Reverend Mary Tumpkin, with Science of Mind, said, God is absolute good. She was with the Centers for Spiritual Living. She and Johnny were very close. She helped Johnny start the Universal Foundation Better Living, if I'm not mistaken. Della Reese said, watch your mouth. Watch your mouth. The words you speak have power. Watch your mouth. A poor mouth makes a poor life. Reverend Sally Taylor, the first black minister I saw on this platform, I was sitting in the balcony, and I was on the edge of my seat. There's something about seeing someone who looks like you that gives you that sense of kindred spirit. And I heard this powerful woman speak, and I was absolutely amazed. She said, if you need help, don't call me. Talk to God. If you need help, don't call me. She said she would tell her congregants that. Talk to God. As my mother would say, have a little talk with Jesus. Tell him all about your troubles. Talk to God. And then Reverend Galen McDowell. God in you guides you through your so-called problems, heals your body, leads to your success, expresses as love, manifests as joy, and provides for you when you align with the impersonal principle in mind. And of course, Reverend Dr. Ruth Mosley, who said, God will speak through you and tell you what you need to know. And that is so true. There are times, I don't know about you, when I feel so lost and try to figure out what am I supposed to do with a certain situation. But if I just step back, take a breath, and allow the Spirit to speak, if I just quiet my mind, which is why we practice briefly our meditation in the silence, which is what Myrtle Fillmore did that resulted in her perfect healing of her body. If we would just do that, not be so quick to anger, be so quick to jump to conclusions, and just step back and take a breath and maybe say, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you, or whatever you can say in your mind at that moment just to bring yourself into a place of peace. That's where we find God. That's where we find the answers to our problems. That's where we know we are one in spirit. So this Black History Month, when friends say to you, why do we have Black History Month? I mean, why? Because we need to understand each other and where we come from. And that will help us to be much better stewards of God's wonderful diversity. We say that, and I heard this one time, and we've made Courageous Conversations, this is our mantra, diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. So before we move into meditation, I'm going to give you a challenge. How many of you like to dance? I do too. Love to dance. How many people that you don't know have you asked to dance today? How many people are you afraid to approach and say, would you dance with me? And I don't mean physical dance, although I would invite that. I love to dance. Just turn on the music, I'm there. But I mean spiritual dance. How many people not like yourself have you danced with? That's the gem of wisdom I want to leave you with today. As you go out this door, look around you. Who is it that kind of got your attention? Who is it that you would like to dance with and get to know them on more than a surface level? More than the person sitting next to you or that you see across the room or you happen to run into on Sundays. If you want to go deeper into that idea, come to a Courageous Conversations meeting, second and fourth Sundays, where we talk about some of those intimate things that make it difficult for us to have conversations about things that we're concerned about things that may not sound politically correct. But in order for us to create change, we have to be vulnerable and willing to be uncomfortable. So for some people, it's uncomfortable to talk about Black History Month. For some people, it's uncomfortable to talk about differences and diversity. But I guarantee you, if you stretch yourself and invite someone to dance, you'll be amazed at how not only will you know the truth, but it will set you free. Let's take that into meditation.